What's up, guys? Today we're back. It's time to give some more feedback about Destiny 2. So today I wanted to give some thoughts about the state of the game in regards to community sentiment right now. Of course, following the recent announcement about things like trials, this has triggered a lot of feedback, but also frustration from players about various elements of the game, not just trials itself. And I think on the whole there's a lot of anxious discussion about how Bungie communicate, how they prioritize community wishes, and whether the community on the whole is on the same page as Bungie, or whether Bungie are on the same page as us, depending on how you want to phrase that question. But a lot of folks have issues or concerns with how Destiny is being handled. So let's talk about some of the things that stand out. This feedback is about future releases, quality of life, activities, and content which a lot of folks still consider to be missing in the game. And I think it's important to say that Bungie do need to listen to the community right now because there are new games dropping. And this is kind of divisive in itself, you know, Division versus Anthem versus Destiny versus this versus that. But on top of this, Bungie are trying a new model with the annual pass. Some things work, and some things absolutely do not work. And I think on top of this, for the community overall, there is concern about what comes next and the way that the studio are doing things. As many folks have said, in a world without Activision, there is essentially no one else to blame, and the worst possible thing that I could think of happening right now would be any of the kind of fiascos at the same level as what we saw post D2 launch. So I want to jump in and just talk about a bunch of stuff, represent some of what I'm seeing in the community to the best of my ability here, but of course be sure to let us know your thoughts down below. This is a community conversation, and I should also add that this is not a hate video. I just wanted to analyze some of the community perspectives and why they are important right now. One of the reasons that I wanted to jump in and talk about this today, guys, is because I have seen an increase in frustration in the community recently, and there are a lot of different reasons that this could be happening, but if I was to pick one kind of community statement that sort of summarizes a lot of the stuff I'm seeing, it would be this one right here. So this Reddit post has been on the top of Destiny the game for a couple of days. You can see it's got a fair few upvotes right there, a lot of comments and conversation, and this is pretty similar to stuff that I've been seeing in my comment section. And I had a moment where I realized this whole Trials announcement has been one of the biggest community Bungie clashes since the dark days of Vanilla D2. And we should also mention faction rallies right here, I think, as well. Both of these are D2 vanilla events that went away to be reworked, and I think it's safe to say that when they were taken away, when Bungie made that announcement, that a lot of folks kind of expected that these events would have returned to the game by now. Since we already know what Bungie have to say about Trials, absolutely, Bungie should also communicate plans for faction rallies moving forward, assuming that they aren't returning next season. If they are coming in Season 6, then that's absolutely fantastic. If not though, I think it's time to get ahead of this, and Bungie need to come out with a more holistic answer to what they want these events to be, but also whether it's realistic to imagine Faction Rally or Trials in D2's lifecycle again whatsoever, even if it's going to be in year 3 or something. The issue, I think, is that folks do consider these events as vanilla or intrinsic content for Destiny 2, and so at the very least, better communication is important. Briefly, on the subject of Trials, I have spoken about this a little bit. I think we should mention why it's important and why everyone keeps banging on about it, because of course not everyone played Trials, not everyone necessarily gets why Trials should be a thing in Destiny. And I think the best answer on the whole is that while we do have comp in D2 right now, we don't have anywhere near the kind of PvP endgame present for primarily PvP players. And comp is very much a different affair to Trials. At the higher end, I would say it's much more difficult than Trials in general, but also it doesn't provide the same level of excitement and collective community interest in PvP. And this is why Trials is missed. And I think on the whole, having Pinnacle PvP in the way that Trials did it, at the same time as Pinnacle PvE, is one of the things that made Destiny very popular in year 1. So Bungie have basically confirmed no trials in the annual pass, and so if you ask me, surely the conversation now is going to revolve around what happens in September. I personally believe that if they are dropping regular content after September of this year, that trials in some form should absolutely be a focus for PvP in this new sandbox, but we'll get to the September conversation in a moment. Be sure to let me know your thoughts below. Next though, let's talk about much more imminent content. Of course, we're waiting for the Joker's Wild DLC. And one of the things that I've noticed about this versus other releases is that currently there's very little excitement for Joker's Wild, and that's not because we know it's going to be bad or anything like that, but I think it's because we haven't seen the same level of communication about this release as we have in the past. Now Bungie were also a little bit quieter on Black Armory, but we did however have lots of hype about these Golden Age exotic weapons that we'd known about since September of last year, and when Black Armory dropped, of course, the exotics that we got were absolutely one of the best bits of that content drop. and we knew about them because they were a very big component of selling the annual pass to us. However, we haven't really seen any stuff to get the player base excited about Joker's World yet. Now, while this may sound like a demand for a reveal, what I'm trying to say is that on top of not knowing whether we get content in September, whether certain events or content will actually resume in the game, we now also have major questions remaining about a drop that's going to happen in, just a couple of weeks' time. So I'm not suggesting that Bungie hype something beyond what it is. However, we've lived in a world with Destiny where content drops have always been hyped, and I think players get this sense that if Bungie aren't talking about it, then maybe it's not going to be all that great. And I think this does have an effect on the community overall. So maybe some clearer, earlier communication about Season 6 and Joker's World could have been pretty healthy, but again, not really a demand, more of an observation on that front. So what else is it that's getting the community frustrated right now? Well, I think we should talk about basic quality of life changes. And an example of where the community and Bungie are kind of clashing would be the persistence that Bungie have on matters such as the enhancement core economy. From what I've seen personally from hundreds or thousands of comments and posts, and the conversations that I have with other players every day, I see an overwhelming shared opinion on the matter of enhancement cores for Infusion, yet Bungie, after 6 months, are still kind of drip feeding new, not very great ways of earning that currency. And I think the player base has kind of got the sense that Bungie are ignoring the fact that we're telling them that we don't think this is working. And one of the reasons for this is that I think D2 has enough grind and RNG in some of the wrong places as it is, and we don't necessarily need more. But again, this is something that could change next season. That would be absolutely fantastic, but we haven't had that communication effort as of yet. Another area where I think sentiment could be improved by seeing positive changes would be in RNG in the game in general. Especially on the subject of titles, I think Bungie should reduce RNG in titles as they introduce new ones into the game. Exotics and other certain rewards have been spoken about a lot. Let's assume that Xur's bounties next season will improve the RNG side of Year 2 exotics without simply giving them away. That has the potential to be a really good change. For items such as Dreaming City cosmetics, honestly, if these kinds of items in general are going to be required for titles in the future, then I think the community on the whole would really like to see some kind of bad luck protection for this kind of content, just like what we saw in the Escalation Protocol, where the longer you don't get something, the better chances for the drop actually become. A certain degree of rarity and RNG in Destiny will always be a thing, and I think it will always be important to the game, but I think at the minute there are just too many brick walls where players feel that the game is very inconsistent and pretty unrewarding. There is also consistent feedback about the rate of updates to sandbox and other issues in the game. I'd say in general, Bungie have improved this a little bit, especially last year they did a very good job of it, but once again since Forsaken, things have quietened down on that front, and it is a thing that players notice. I think there are other things to talk about here, other big missed opportunities. Some of the things I'm going to speak about now could possibly have been kind of shelved or pooled for Year 3 of Destiny 2 or a future game, but let's talk about them anyway. Once again, I think Bungie would have an opportunity to delight players and also respond to a lot of feedback when it comes to cosmetic improvements on gear. And most of the stuff looks really awesome in Destiny, it's always been one of its strong points. But again, we're going to hit on the subject of armor ornaments for legendary gear, just like we saw in Year 3 of D1. It's something that's spoken about quite a lot, and again, it's another area where Bungie hit a certain standard in the past, and then unfortunately have not been able or have not continued to produce stuff at that standard. And I think when it comes to endgame armor visuals, there is absolutely no argument that what we had in Age of Triumph was significantly more appealing than what we get now cosmetically. And this would also extend to strike-specific loot. Of course, Bungie have fleshed out pretty much every strike in the game with a unique drop that comes from the Nightfall version, but I think when it comes to strike specifics, there is still a pretty long way to go. There are still a lot of folks that feel the strike playlist content should have these kind of unique rewards. And I think this is probably built partly around the idea that back in D1, the Heroic Strike playlist itself, that was the kind of more replayable element, whereas the Nightfall versions, you'd maybe do them when they come up once a week. So I understand Bungie attempting to make the Nightfalls themselves more appealing, and there are a number of ways that they have done that, but on the whole, the Strike playlist and the way that loot works is only a fraction as interesting as it was in D1. And this also does link back to that cosmetic discussion. A lot of Strike-specific content in D1 was cosmetically themed around the enemies we were fighting. Then you could farm those strikes, be it in the Nightfall or in the playlist, to get opportunities to get them dropped with random rolls. So there was a lot of choice about what stuff looked like, and then the ability to get basically completely random roll perks on those pieces of gear is definitely something that Bungie could look at. Another thing I would list would be exotic catalysts. We know that we're going to be getting more Year 1 catalysts coming in Joker's World. Bungie have confirmed that they'll bring some back from the Year 1 pool of catalysts that they didn't release yet, and in a way that also feels like a confirmation that we still won't see any Year 2 exotic catalysts. And this is a big point of frustration once again, and you'll notice that I'm listing a lot of stuff that Bungie have done in the past already: crazy cosmetics on gear, strike-specific loot, exotic catalysts, and that's because I think there is value to speaking to what Bungie have done in the past and how they are maybe falling short with some of that same stuff right now. As a lot of folks in the community say, why reinvent the wheel? And I think sometimes that absolutely applies. Either way, exotic catalysts have been one of Bungie's greatest innovations for Destiny 2, and right now, beyond what we have from the Year 1 pool, it isn't being utilized in the game, and I think that's a big shame. Now, we could go on with this list pretty much forever, but I think this is a well-rounded look at a lot of stuff that people talk about in the community. Once again, it's possible that some of these things could be improved in the next content drop, but versus last year, we simply don't know how these things are being improved moving forward, and this is because communication has dropped off quite a bit. Bungie have continued to take community feedback, and we get the community manager still talking to folks a lot online, which is great, but it doesn't always constitute valuable communication for the player at least, and so I think players do want to see more of the existing questions approached. Now, a couple of final things I would love to talk about right here would be general major communication drop-off since Year 1. Of course, when everything went bad in Year 1 of Destiny 2, Bungie started to, slowly turn the ship around as soon as they could. By this time last year, we were getting a lot of communication from Bungie. They were putting together roadmaps for the entire year, but generally being a lot more communicative about what they were trying to do, how they were trying to respond to feedback, but also the challenges that they were facing while doing that. And I think on the whole, the community was in a much more positive place because of those conversations, and that right now is not happening at the same rate as it was last year. And I understand that for Bungie, while they're trying to make plans for the future, develop content, and make sense of a sea of feedback, it isn't entirely easy, to present roadmaps and give your plans away really early. It's not easy to have the answers to all of these questions. Nonetheless, it is Bungie's job to communicate, and so this is going to be one of their challenges. I would also add that franchise communication is going to have to occur in the next few months. Considering the split with Activision, we still have questions about Destiny 2 Year 3, Destiny 3 in general and the plan, and of course Bungie aren't going to reveal stuff that they can't reveal, but I think the community would definitely appreciate getting some kind of generic idea of what we can expect over the next year or so, especially because that is also, a question beyond what we get over the next 2 updates. Anything after August of this year is pretty much a complete mystery. So guys, those would be the points of feedback that I could give right now. Once again, I can only give the perspectives that I can see from other folks and my personal perspectives, and not everybody feels the same. Different things are important to different people, so be sure to let me know your thoughts down below. Whenever it's a little bit quieter like this, I think it's a good time for feedback, and I think considering the questions we have about the future, as well as what's going on in the community right now, definitely warrants this kind of conversation. So I hope you guys have enjoyed the video nonetheless. If you have a rating for this one, I'd appreciate that down below. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy the conversation and want to keep up to date with news and everything related to Destiny 2 right here, then feel free to hit that subscribe button. Nonetheless, I appreciate you guys tuning in and listening to this video once again, and whatever you get up to, I hope you have an awesome day.